look at the value judgments and choices you're making throughout the day, and just make sure that those judgments, even if there's a convenience factor there, you have to weigh, is that convenience worth more than your values? And that's something that we all have to think about when we're making those value judgments.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Waiting Room Podcast. Today we are joined by me, Surfnam, and Ian, as usual.
And we have two guests. The first is our friend Will, and the second is Bipedal Ape, who is a vegan activist, and he's a really nice guy. He joined us on our podcast today, and we're just going to ask him a few questions about veganism and how it's affected his life.
Yes, this guy has a very
good intro.
non-stereotypical approach to being a veganism, so make sure you stay tuned, watch to the end, and it means a lot. Thank you, and enjoy the podcast.
Yeah, sure. I'm a vegan. My name is Bipedal Ape. That's what I go by on Discord and social media, which I've just started to be engaged on.
Cool. So, how long have you been a vegan for, and what was your turning point to becoming a vegan?
Yeah, so I've actually, to the surprise of many people, especially on these stages I've been running, I've been vegan only 6 months.
Really?
And what actually brought me to veganism wasn't the ethics. I come from a farm-based family, intergenerationally. I hunted when I was young. I fished. I did all these things. And so I was very disassociated from the ethics argument when it comes to veganism. It wasn't something that resonated with me. But what actually brought me into the fold of veganism, what first brought me into the fold of veganism was the efficiency argument that was brought to me. So I actually was exposed to the numbers that showed plant-based farming in comparison to meat-based farming, and the inadequacy between the efficiency of each of those two. So on almost every point you could quantify ecological impact, carbon emission output, land usage, freshwater usage, energy, labor, etc. Plant-based farming was incredibly more efficient than meat-based farming. So that was the first thing that actually brought me towards the step of veganism. I actually went to war with veganism at that point because I needed to justify my love for meat and this cultural heritage that I had here. And that was my first step towards trying to disprove veganism, which actually brought me, ironically, then to be a vegan. So I then went on to the health argument. I thought surely there's something inherent to meat-based eating and meat in general, nutritional speaking, that I'm not getting from plant-based foods. And when I went down that route, I took more L's because it just wasn't true. Everything nutritionally that I needed, I could get in abundance in plant-based foods, and in some rare cases, I could easily supplement. And so the last thing that came for me was the ethics argument, and I actually reevaluated the ethics and my own morality, and that surprised me even further because what I found was not that vegans had a different moral framework or different rationale that they were using. We actually had the same. It's just that I would suspend my use of this moral framework when it came to the animals, when it came to those value judgments I was making. And it's just because of normalization. I mean, I would disassociate from it. So that was my path towards veganism.
That's really cool. Honestly, I remember a year ago back, I did the 7-day vegan challenge where you can only eat vegan foods for a week. And I found it very hard to give up meat and go completely vegan. Do you ever miss eating meat or dairy products or stuff like that?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a common one. The first couple of months, I dare to say maybe even 2 months, that was absolutely the case. I mean, I came into veganism kicking and screaming. I had this love and this. See, the thing is with eating meat, because it's all I've known, it's not just about the texture and the flavor profiles of meat, but it's the nostalgia too, right? I have a lot of nostalgia associated with these dishes that I would make. There's even a cultural heritage aspect to it, like I'm American.
Yeah.
So, we barbecue, we like to throw, food on the grill. So all of those things. And so, and originally, I mean, I needed and I craved and wanted meat, not just because of the flavor profiles and texture, but I craved the nostalgia that was associated with cooking and eating that food too. But what I found is, as I started experimenting with buying plant-based foods, and I started very heavily with plant-based meats because it was something that was familiar. It was a way for me to bridge that gap where I could, get a sense of that nostalgia, get a sense of that texture and taste and those flavor profiles. And so I could say it was kind of like a crutch. But what I found is as I continued, purchasing more plant-based, as I started to become into the fold of veganism, I started to develop those experiences, those same cultural experiences I could now associate with those plant-based foods. I was kind of I was not losing out as I originally thought. It was kind of like riding a roller coaster. It was like, the first time you ride a roller coaster and you kind of overthink it, and you're on the way up the tracks and you're thinking like, oh, this is going to be so bad. I'm, blah blah blah. But then once you get over that first hump, which for me was the first couple of months, that was over. I realized it wasn't that bad at all. I'm not missing out from those nostalgic experiences. Matter of fact, I could recreate those nostalgic experiences and still even have the cultural elements, but I could integrate it with plant-based foods. And I don't even at this point have to do that with plant-based meats like Beyond or Impossible. I mean, I'm able at this point to take, I can make nuggets and I can make burgers, and I can do that using beans. I can do that using soy. There's so many things that I could do using plant-based foods to get those experiences and those cultural experiences. I didn't have to use meat, though the first couple of months it did seem difficult just because of that nostalgia and because of that conditioning.
So did you ever try like Impossible burgers and that kind of stuff to substitute for meat?
Oh yeah, I bought it like crazy. Matter of fact, even when Burger King first came out with the Impossible Whopper, I mean, I probably spent a mortgage on them, just going back and forth and buying it just to get this kind of craving, this kind of experience I was used to. Yeah, for sure. Those foods definitely helped me bridge that gap in the beginning.
And
Some people say that. Yeah, I was gonna say like some people say they don't taste like actual meat. What's your opinion? Are they the real deal?
Yeah. So I can answer that in two ways. First of all, being intellectually honest, I completely understand where those people are coming from when they say it doesn't taste like meat. There is some differences, right? Of course. But I would also say again, that there's so many different ways to make meat, to cook it, different burger joints and such. And if you look even on YouTube, for example, and I did it with my own family. I bought the Impossible meat and I made burgers and then presented it to friends and family. I didn't let them know, it was plant-based, and they didn't think anything of it, right? But if you look for something, you're going to find it, right? If you're hyper focusing on finding that difference, of course you're going to find it. But most people don't do that when they eat. So, Impossible meat and Beyond is still in its infancy, but even where it is right now, it's easily passable unless you're really looking for it.
I really like that. But in your opinion, are there any downsides to being vegan? Like, have you realized that you're at a protein deficiency or any like negative effects?
Yeah, no, not at all. I get this question a lot too, especially when I'm on these stages and I'm talking to hundreds of people in a day about this, being an advocate. I actually, if anything, I think I consume more protein now because the foods that I eat, again, peanut butter, even before I was vegan, foods that I would eat that were plant-based, that are high in calorie. I like to lift weights a lot. They're high in protein. They were foods that were plant-based. I mean, peanut butter is a good example, lots of nuts. And I eat more of that now than I did when I was in meat-based. I mean, I make sauces out of cashews and walnuts, and I drape that over bean-based nuggets and burgers. And so I'm getting a high concentration of protein and calories, and I'm not missing out in any way.
I really see that too because when you really look at it, a lot of the protein people consume in America at least are like fast food burgers, something that's not really healthy. So when you really look at like the lean good protein like chicken or stuff like that, like it doesn't have a lot of protein per volume of food.
True. And then also you have to look at, even for, each ounce of protein you're getting, you have to look at all the other stuff you're getting with it, right? Yeah. Another thing I noticed going vegan, and I'm a bigger guy, I'm 240 pounds. I like to lift weights. I like to be active. So I like to eat. I like to indulge. And when I would eat a lot of meat food relative to now, when I indulge myself on plant-based foods, and this is even scientific, but because of the the fat and such that's inside there that my body has to break down, I'm less tired. I can indulge myself and eat 3 meals and feel less tired, less like I need a nap than when I would indulge on eating a bunch of steak, for example.
I just want to butt in here really quickly. I did just like look some stuff up, and I want to
Sure.
ask your opinion on some of the stuff
Yeah.
that you're talking about right now.
Go for it.
I read that these like legumes and stuff that you would eat, that like vegan people eat, to get their daily recommended like source of protein, that they contain phthalic acid. Can't really pronounce it, which can
Mhm.
decrease the absorption of iron and calcium in
Mm.
your body. Uh, do you feel like this has any actual effect, or do you feel like you do get the amount of iron and calcium and zinc that you would need out of this protein and
Yeah.
like
I mean,
other
sorry,
supplements?
but like also
Yeah.
did some research and I found that vegans actually live like 7 to 15 years longer than
Yeah.
omnivores and like people who eat
Yeah.
meat. So that's also a factor to take in.
Yeah. Yeah, and the other thing I want to take into consideration when you're bringing up something like iron, for example, which is another common one talking point that people bring up to me, I just want to ground that by saying, you don't need that much iron in your daily intake, first of all. And second of all, even if there is some science, which I'm not an expert on and I won't pretend to be, even if there's a bit of a depletion deficiency in my ability to intake things such as iron, I still don't see an issue with it because I don't need that much of an intake of iron, and I'm still getting iron, right? Like even if there's a depleted efficiency, and everyone's dietary needs are different, right? So some people need to account for more iron, etc. And if I found that I had in my blood tests a depletion of iron, which isn't the case for me specifically, then I would hedge against that by just increasing the intake of iron in the foods that I'm eating. I could even supplement. But again, the point is, even if there is some efficiency drop off there, it's very easily hedged against just by intaking, just increasing my intake of certain foods, plant-based foods that have iron in them. So it's not a hard problem to hedge against.
Um, okay, this is
That
a
is
bit.
very
Oh, sorry, my
interesting.
bad. You can
Oh,
go.
can I go?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yep.
All right. So of course, being a vegan, it like limits a lot of your it limits a lot of your diet, and so let's say
Mhm.
you're traveling and you can't really find any like vegan restaurants or restaurants
Mhm.
that don't serve vegan food. How do you usually deal
Mhm.
with it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the first thing I would say, if it's me traveling alone, obviously I would, if I'm going to go to a restaurant, I'm going to look up that place beforehand and make sure I do have vegan food available. If and this has been a real case for me, excuse me, when I go to a restaurant with friends, for example, who maybe haven't quite normalized the fact that I'm vegan or thought about it, and I've run into that situation and they don't have vegan options, well, there's usually always something I can eat, right? There's usually French fries. There's always something, even a place that isn't catering around just vegan meals specifically. There's always something I can purchase on the side that I can indulge in with my friends. Even in the most meat-based restaurant I can find a plant-based substitute or a plant-based food. It's not that hard actually. And I also just extend from that and say, I mean, I've been in some of the most rural areas you can imagine. I've been in South India just before COVID actually happened. I was there for a month in South India in the state of Kerala, and even in Kerala, which India as a whole is one of the most vegan countries, but in the specific area I was in, it's very Christian, and they actually eat meat. It's in abundance there, and even in some of the most rural parts where there's dairy farmers, and animal agriculture there, where they as a heavy staple, I had no problem finding plant-based foods. It's pretty easy because anywhere they're eating meat, I mean they have to feed that cattle. They're already growing crop to some whatever degree or sourcing it from somewhere else, and they're also not only eating meat. I mean you can't get all your nutritional value from just meat. So there's always something plant-based I can find and eat.
So I'm gonna digress the situation, like not the conversation a bit. You said you lift weights, correct?
Yeah.
Um, do you take any supplements when you lift weights? And how do you feel about those? Like, have you ever heard like
Well,
creatine monohydrate?
I have, yeah. I have
How do
some
you feel
friends
about
who
that?
use those too.
Because
Well, for
personally, I
me,
also I use that, and I did
yeah,
months of research on that, and it was a hard decision.
yeah.
So how do you feel about that?
Yeah, you might know a little bit more than that than me, but I'll say I don't use supplements when I lift. When I was younger, I did. I used a lot of like whey protein. There was some creatine I used also. But I want to then say and focus on me now. I mean, I try to take a more whole food approach. The thing is, I'm not like a high sports athlete. I'm not playing on the NFL football team. There's not this huge demand for me to source ridiculous amounts of particular nutrients for my activity. Right. I exercise as a hobby and to be healthy. And so anything I need for that exhaustion, I can source from my food. And if I need to even up the ante, right? If I need more protein or calorie, things like that, I can just up my intake of food I like to eat, and that correlates with that activity. So on days where I'm doing higher activity, maybe I'll make an additional peanut butter sandwich with some bananas in that, some potassium, just to get higher, more calories, more protein, more potassium, and I'll also, just because my body will tell me I'm more hungry.
Yeah.
I'll eat more vegetables. I'll eat more food that day because I've exerted myself more. And so my body will tell me if it needs me to hedge against that.
I really respect that. Yeah.
Well, I have one more question about the veganism, just to bring it back to food.
Yeah.
You said that your reason for becoming vegan was not based in any like animal cruelty or that kind of stuff. So, what
Yeah.
made you choose to be vegan and not vegetarian?
Yeah, well, I was on the path for so it took me a little over a year, which I'm not necessarily proud of, but because the ethics came last. So for me, it started off as me just becoming plant-based. I mean, you could even call me a vegetarian at that point. I resonated with the efficiency, and then I started moving towards the health focus, and then it was a gradual thing for me. So as I continued to become more educated in these areas, I started becoming more plant-based. Even at one point, you could have even also called me a vegetarian. But the point is, I eventually did arrive at that at the ethics. But the thing is, I was more open to the ethics at that point because I had been following the logic that was opening me up to plant-based foods. It was de-weaponizing my disassociation of meat because I was becoming gradually more plant-based and even vegetarian at one point. So once I reached that stage, I mean, the ethics argument became easier and more palpable for me because I wasn't so disconnected and disassociated from plant-based foods. I could more honestly approach the ethics argument and not disassociate it from it as much. I was more disarmed, maybe is a good way to put it.
That's very interesting. I had one last question. So, does your vegan only restrict your diet, or does your veganism also apply to like other products, such as like
Mm-hmm.
accessories or anything?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So, yeah, it absolutely does. So, veganism is not just a diet, right? It's a lifestyle, it's a philosophy, it's a state of mind. And so, a good example I give to people, especially when it comes to consumerism or the clothes that I'm wearing. So, I'm much more conscious now. So, an easy example I'll give, and I'll segue to a couple others. But, when I go to the grocery store now, I'll bring my own bags or I'll leave them in the car. It's a simple conscious decision I can make that's going to minimize my contribution to unnecessary plastic waste, for example, right? Which affects the ecosystem, even me, right? Because microplastics are a big problem that is viscerating through the food chain. But this also extends to consumerism in general that I engage in. So if I can reuse a bowl or something without having to throw it out just because I don't like the design of it, I'll do that. So it extends to all areas of my life where I look at the value judgments I'm making, the decisions I'm making, and I'm not just making them on a superficial level or out of convenience, right? I'm making these choices. Is it reasonable for me to use this item, or do I need this item? And if I don't, then I won't use it or buy it, because there's no need for me to contribute to creating more excess when it's not needed.
This is I'm gonna ask a question that gets a bit personal, so you don't have to answer if you don't want
Sure.
to. But how has
Sure.
like being a vegan helped your mental health?
That's a great question. That's a really interesting question. Um, hmm. Maybe the way I'll approach that, if I had to say how being vegan has helped my mental health. I think it's made me more empathetic just as a byproduct, which has helped my interpersonal relationships because now me being more connected to the ethics and not disassociating as much when I'm having conversations, with my girlfriend or with my friends or with my family. I'm so used to now as a practice and as a mind state, constantly just evaluating the things I'm doing, the things I'm saying, and what their effects are. And so I'm more conscious. I'm in a higher state of consciousness when I'm making these choices or saying these things. So I think being vegan has kind of conditioned me to be more conscious with my interpersonal relationships, and the way that affects my mental health is it avoids a lot of the unnecessary arguments before I may have gotten into. It allows me to have more productive conversations from a more understanding point of view, where I could just disregard maybe somebody's feelings easier. So there just as a state of mind and a conditioned way of looking and responding, it's helped my mental health by improving my relationships.
No, I really like that. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Oh,
And now, oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Let's just segue a little bit from veganism. We can come back if anyone has any more questions. I'd just like to learn more about you. So can you tell us
Sure.
more about like your hobbies or just what you're passionate about? Anything?
Yeah, I mean, well, so I'm an investor. I worked in the IT industry for a number of years, and I actually have been self-employed for the past 3 years, almost now, 2.5, 3 years coming on. And my self-employment just came from over the years, the money that I made doing IT, working for some Fortune 500 companies. I reinvested that into things like real estate, a couple of small startups, and now, the past 3 years, I've been able to step away from the corporate world and just manage those investments. And now I'm working on a couple eco startups that kind of align more with my moral values. I like to call myself an eco capitalist now, but that's a little bit about me. Yeah.
no, I like that. Obviously, that takes a lot of work. How do you find yourself staying on topic and stay motivated, not procrastinate?
Yeah, I think doing stuff like this, I mean, is always inspiring. I mean, the stages, for example, where we met, which was recently launched, on Discord, which by the way was 2 days into me even having Discord. And I like to pull my motivation and my validation from peers who have a common thought process, things that we have in common. It's always nice to see people being active and they're taking their values and they're trying to make a change in the world. It's very motivating to see people do that. And, it kind of reinforced that for me when I found these group of people who are doing the same, and that helps me pull energy towards, for example, the startup I'm working on. There's a lot of work that's involved in building a business model and trying to make that work, and it's tiring. But again, us being social creatures, me being aware that I'm also very extroverted, I draw a lot of my energy and validation from my peer group. So curating my peer group and putting myself in front of people who can validate the way that I'm thinking, who maybe even appreciate it, or I can even draw inspiration from what they're doing. That always helps me a lot.
Okay, I like that. But talking about peers, there's always going to be those closed-minded people that,
Yeah.
obviously like, oh, veganism is bad, you should eat meat. How do you deal with those kinds of people?
Yeah, I run into that all the time, even in my own family. I can't reach inside people's minds and make them, accept different facts or ways of thinking. All I can do is stay true to my values and my thoughts. And when I run into those people, the best thing I can do is to just be genuine, just be honest. Have a conversation with them. Share with them the way I'm thinking, the education I've received, and whether they're going to accept that or not is definitely going to be up to them. But as long as I feel that I've been consistent, that I haven't been, uprooted in terms of my education, I haven't been exposed to some new fact that shakes me, and that in itself is validating, right?
And yeah, you just mentioned family, and I'm not sure if you're comfortable answering this because this will be a
Yeah,
bit personal.
sure.
But you said that you grew up with a farming family, and you know, killing
Yeah,
animals is part of that. So
sure.
how would your family react to your veganism and like you being against that kind of stuff now?
Yeah, so how they did react is maybe a bit stereotypical, right? So they came from the farms in Missouri. My mom was a little small town farmer girl. She slaughtered cows and stuff for a living since she was very young. And when I started to come into the fold of veganism, and that became evident, when I would show up and I wouldn't indulge in some of the dishes maybe she would make, or I would make suggestions on things that they could make on the side, etc. Yeah, I received a lot of pushback, right? A lot of mockery and kind of red herrings and jokes and stuff. And I expected that was going to happen. But I will say, again, by taking that stuff on the chin, it only emboldened me to think more deeply about my position, to understand my position more, so I could articulate that better to these people who were giving me this pushback, especially in family. So it deepened my understanding of my position and my ability to present it, and actually emboldened me to do so. And I'll say, with my immediate family, particularly my parents, I haven't been able to convince them or bring them into the fold of veganism, but what I have been able to do is change their mind about what veganism is, about what it means, and how that applies in the real world. And I've been able to assert that influence and that consistency even in their lives, whereas they haven't become vegans. They buy a little bit more plant-based now. They are thinking a little bit more about the decisions they're making, whether it's for themselves or for me. And that's all I can do, and that's all I can expect.
I think that's a really good attitude to have.
Yeah,
Like
I
just
really
to
like that.
take
Yeah.
take the criticism and convince them otherwise. I think that's
Yeah.
really good.
Yep.
Yeah, I just got a quick question. So I was thinking about this while you were talking about how you kind of been influencing your family. Do you think
Sure.
that the country and the world as a whole could take up veganism, or at least become more conscious about what they eat?
Yeah.
Or do you feel like people have too much of a rigid mindset
Yeah.
against these like people and like their actions against having healthier foods and having
Yeah.
more like eco-friendly foods?
Yeah, it's a good question. I actually am going to agree with both, and then I'll kind of explain what I mean. So I think there are plenty of people, there's no shortage of rigid mind thinking and kind of one track mind thinking, and just suspension and disassociation from the ethics or the environment. But at the same time, I'm an optimist. And when I look at just even the past 10 to 15 years, the amount of vegans that have grown, how it's penetrated the collective conscience and where that's trending towards. And then I see people like myself or some of my close friends who, even as a job, they're actually being hired to go to universities, to go to schools, to speak to dietitians, and kind of change some of those old habits and reinforcements that's happening in culture about plant-based foods. I can be nothing but optimistic about the future, that we're going to continue to trend towards a more vegan world than a non-vegan one. And I also look at, again, from an entrepreneur standpoint, me being somebody who is what you would call a capitalist, an entrepreneur. This has penetrated my consciousness and changed a lot of the energy that's going towards something that I'm good at, that I enjoy, and how I'm incorporating veganism into that, and even friends that I have that are doing that just opened up in our city another vegan restaurant, right? So they're just creating more availability. This is raising up the demand, which is going to increase the demand for that supply. So I can't help but be optimistic, though at the same time I do know that we are going to have these rigid mind people. We're going to have this pushback. But again, just in the same way that pushback happened with my family, that's just a part of what change entails. We have to take that on the chin, and we have to deepen our understanding of our arguments, our ability to articulate that, give people the tools and educational resources in order to start to repeal some of these red herrings that exist in culture. And so people start to understand what veganism is more. They start to understand the value of eating plant-based. And as long as we're doing that consistently and we're continuing to operate within our sphere of influence to others, that's going to have a compounding effect. It doesn't mean it'll happen overnight. It doesn't mean that we can snap our fingers like Thanos and make that happen. But change progressively has never happened overnight. It's always started with even just a simple conversation.
That you bring up some really good points, and about the rigidity of people's minds and how they're unwilling to be open-minded and listen to other perspectives, and then therefore change their lifestyle. About that, along those same lines, have you ever had people have some sort of misunderstanding about like going vegan, and how have you like ever addressed those misunderstandings?
Yeah, I get that all the
Maybe like
time.
there's some
Probably.
sort of conflict. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the biggest one I get is that people actually they think veganism is a diet. They think that, I'm like that vegan teacher or something, that I'm just saying don't eat don't eat animal products whatsoever, and you're just a evil person if you do, and it's just all about the diet, right? But that's not at all what veganism is. So the biggest misunderstanding I have when people come to me and they want to talk about veganism, or maybe they have this preconceived notion of what veganism is, they think that it's a diet, and it's so much more than that. It's a lifestyle and philosophy that's about putting other sentient life and your effect on them and minimizing it, right? And that extends, like I was saying, even as a habit, as conditioning into my interpersonal relationships. To me, to be vegan, it's so much more than to just go and not buy chicken and buy carrots or something, for example. It's also about paying attention to the words that I say. It's about listening to what other people have to say. It's about being conscious on every value judgment I'm making, and making sure that value judgment I'm making aligns with my moral framework and my ethics, that it's minimizing detrimental effect to them. That way I'm maximizing value to myself and them.
I really resonate with that, but talking about people with rigid minds, obviously with every group of people, there's going to be a loud minority and toxic people. How do you react with toxic vegans that give the vegan people a bad rep?
That's great. Yeah, I've heard that a lot, especially, vegan teacher comes up a whole lot these days with the TikTok community. And the best thing I can say is I can do my best to be an advocate and stand for and represent what veganism is. And to those toxic people, those people who are misrepresenting veganism, obviously that's bad. There's no right way to do activism, and I would prefer maybe if they didn't do that. But at the same time, I'm at least happy we're having the conversation about veganism, because I can then maybe address and dispel those myths that maybe otherwise you wouldn't feel inflamed to ask me or to approach me about. And then extending from that, veganism is not about one person representing it. It's about the logic. It's about the rationale. It's about the philosophy. And so, there's always going to be bad advocates for everything. And those bad advocates don't represent the group as a whole, nor do they represent what that philosophy or lifestyle means. And so it's important that people get exposed to even the bad, because the bad shouldn't be, those bad representatives shouldn't be the decider between whether you're going to be vegan or not. The ethics and the logic and the rationale should be. And we need to have that conversation, even if that means that you have a bad exposure to somebody who's a bad advocate for veganism.
Yeah, unfortunately, with like the prevalent use of social media, people have been just so prejudiced against like change itself as a general topic, where because of these bad people, there's a bad rep to anything, and there's a sort of stigma associated with it. But
Yeah.
it's nice to see people like you advocating on like logic and stuff.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that and say, we do live in that social media digital age, and silo and echo chambers are commonplace, becoming even more common. And the best thing we can do to combat that, it's a problem not just with veganism, it's a problem in general with this new era of humanity that we're in. We are in the age of information just as much as we're in the age of misinformation. And the only way that we can address that, which is not, for veganism or for anything is to try to invite conversation, to try to break out of our echo chambers, to talk to the opposition, to let the logic be the prevailer and not these echo chambers, just to reinforce this misinformation.
And I think it's also important to recognize these like outrageous headlines and stuff as exception and not the rule, and there's like know that there's always going to be a silent majority.
Yeah, exactly.
Digressing the conversation a bit, have you found any life lessons or any morals through your journey of being a vegan?
Ooh, it's a loaded question. Yeah, I want to say, yeah. I mean, yeah, absolutely. I've learned a lot. I mean, I've deepened my connection with my own morals and my own framework. And I've learned how to be more consistent with using it, and not picking and choosing when I use it, just to be convenient for me. I've learned how to be more consistent with my morality and my framework. That's probably the biggest lesson I've learned. It's not that I've relearned morality or reinvented the wheel on morality, but I've deepened my understanding of my own and of my peers. And I've learned how to be more consistent with using it in my day-to-day and my value judgments.
I think that's really nice. So I'm not 100% sure about the statistic I'm going to bring up, but I think alcohol in general is not vegan. I might be wrong on that. If it's not vegan, do you drink alcohol still, or how have you found like a roundabout for that?
So there is a lot of alcohol that's not vegan, right? That does use animal products, but there also is alcohol that doesn't use animal products or animal exploitation. But I also want to ground this by saying, as a vegan, I'm also looking at the brands, right? I'm looking at their treatment of their workers, because I'm voting at the register every time that I purchase that wine or I purchase that beer. And so this is another example of how I can extend the vegan philosophy beyond just the animal consumption part. So yeah, I mean, I still do drink alcohol occasionally. I like wine. I'm a little bit of a wine connoisseur myself, but when I'm making that value judgment, I'm voting at that register. Of course, I'm looking at whether it has animal product in it, but I'm also looking at the other use of ethics for that brand, right? I'm looking at how they treat their workers. I'm looking at where they're sourcing their material from. These are all extensions of veganism that have conditioned me to put conscious thought into, right? That extends outside just the animals.
Building up that last point, how do you feel about Amazon and like how they treat their workers? Do you use Amazon still?
I actually don't use Amazon. I have used Amazon. I do see value in them. And this is where we get into like the deep state veganism here, right? So do I think that Amazon can treat their customers better, or not their customers, their workers better? 100%. Do I think that I need to push for that? Does that mean I support the company? So I don't support Amazon. I don't like a lot of their business practices. I see that a lot of environmental impact from some of the logistics that they use, and even again, their treatment of workers. So I don't support Amazon. I can see how you can make an argument for being vegan and still supporting Amazon, but me personally, when I look at a lot of their business practices and then I look at some of maybe their competitors, I'd rather just source it in a different way. I'd rather not pay for, because again, I'm voting, right? I'm voting for that company and their ethics. I'm giving them power to assert their ethics or their lack thereof, right? So, yeah.
I completely agree with that, but I also think the loud, or even not the loud, I think the majority of people agree with that. Just Amazon is so convenient for everyone that it's hard not to use it.
Agreed. Yeah, and that's a problem. But I'd say that it's important. It's an important problem, especially for the 21st century, when you have, like, it's kind of inescapable when you have companies like Walmart and Amazon that have been a byproduct of our current social structures, and so there's a bit of there's a bit of something you can't escape there in terms of doing, to some degree, business with these individuals who have a monopoly over convenience or have a monopoly over, even some of the products that you may want to source. And so the thing is, again, this just goes back to we don't live in a vegan world. We live in a non-vegan world. And what's important to me when I look at this is I don't look at this as an argument or pushback against veganism. It seems to me as a stronger argument for getting to that vegan world, for educating people and bringing them on board with this way of thinking, so we can start to demand in larger numbers from these companies who they have to pander to their customers, and they change their business practices. It's only going to happen if we demand it.
Of course, it's also about like many people would like to just not use their services because of their ethical
Yeah.
practices, but since it's such a convenient source for them, they can't help but like have to
Yeah.
use it since it's like low cost and really just very convenient. So I think
Yeah.
it's very commendable what you're doing.
One
Yeah,
thing.
no, I appreciate that. And
Sorry.
I would say, just adding on to that, to those people where it is inescapable for them to do business with these people, and in which I understand, and I would understand. I've been there in many respects. I would say that's even more why it's important to get in this conversation, to speak out against these companies, to get out there and vote at the register, to get out there and vote at the polls, to be involved with your friends, to discuss these things, and find any way that you can use your power as an individual, and its effect on the collective, and ultimately, what we choose to stand for and what we give power.
And one thing that really resonated with me was that you said that you're voting every time you choose to buy something. You're voting for that
Yeah.
company.
Yep.
I think if everyone thought like that, they would put a lot more research into the products they buy before they
Yeah.
bought them. And I think a beneficial side effect of that would be like reducing impulse purchases and that kind of stuff.
Agreed.
I think that's a really good attitude to have, that you're voting for the company every time you buy their product.
Yeah, and another thing I'll extend off of that, again, when we make our value judgments, if there's a particular product, let's say if we use Amazon as an example, there's a particular product that maybe is that Amazon has a monopoly over, that you can't source anywhere else, or maybe get at a price point that you can afford. Well, again, I understand that, but we also have to make value judgments, right? And we have to say, is it worth me giving up my values to source this product for this company that I don't agree with and give them power, versus not doing it? And I know that's a tough decision for a lot of people to make, but it's a real one. It's one that we're faced with every day. At some point, you have to say that the convenience is not worth me giving up my values.
Yeah, of course, that is very nice. So of course, like I think what you said, like first the facts and figures got you like inspired to do to choose veganism, right? Like how you saw the ecological impact of that. Then you moved on to the other aspects of it, and I think like your journey just really illustrates very nicely on like uh the proper like mindset one should have.
Yeah.
This is kind of digressing the conversation again back to straight just veganism. Have you ever like participated in a protest where you protest a company or protest? I mean, obviously you do that when you decide,
Yeah.
make the conscious decision not to buy something from a brand. But have you like ever participated in a conventional protest about killing animals?
Yeah, I haven't actually, and I would say that this goes back to not saying that I might not in the future, but I'm still a little new to veganism and being a vegan activist. But that said, my form of activism, while it may not be, on the picket lines of some organized event, my form of veganism is I don't know if I want to use the word indirect, but it's at a more personal level. I'm doing stages. I'm inviting conversation. I mean, at this point, I'm talking to hundreds of people a day, hundreds a day. and probably and just to use that as an example, the stages we've been doing to the server, the activist server alone, we've gotten just in the past week, we've gotten 30,000 viewers that have showed up. And so my form of activism is not on the picket lines, but I don't think there's one right way to do activism, and I myself have never engaged in activism that's been out on the picket lines, for example. I don't know if I ever will. I may, but just as far as where we are in the digital era we're at now, to me, the most useful form of activism I can exert is right here at my fingertips. It's right here, connecting to my peers in this digital space. It's maximizing the people that see that, and it allows for more open conversation. That's not them just passing by and seeing a shocking sign on a picket, with some kind of word, buzzwords they use, like, meat is murder and stuff like that. I think I like my form of activism better because it doesn't rely on some of the more shock and awe, just as a subtle passing by. It invites people to listen to what I have to say, for me to hear them out, and for us to have this one-on-one that otherwise we couldn't get on those picket lines.
I completely agree, and I think this is actually way more effective. Like, you've completely changed my views on veganism and a lot of the stuff we talked about today.
Well, I'm glad. That means a lot.
Yeah, and I think it's just been very
definitely.
informative in general, like just stuff that I
Yeah.
never considered.
Yeah, we definitely learned a lot of new things.
I think that is all the time we have today. So before we go, do you want to leave the viewers with anything? Want to make one last point? Or a message?
Yeah, no, I'd just like to say, everybody who's listening, whoever you may be, I just invite you to look more into veganism, do some introspection, look at the value judgments and choices you're making throughout the day, and just make sure that those judgments, even if there's a convenience factor there, you have to weigh, is that convenience worth more than your values? And that's something that we all have to think about when we're making those value judgments. But yeah, I appreciate it, guys.
You said you're starting to get involved in social media, so do you want to tag anything?
So far it's Discord, but I am going to be going into Facebook and other places. But Bipedal Ape. So if you guys hear that name, look for it. I'm very active in Discord. I'm building up a little bit of a following, but pretty soon I'll be transitioning that into YouTube and to Facebook as well.
Thank you so much. Do you want to? If you want, you can DM me your Discord server username. I can put it in the description. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Yeah, have a good day.
So much for being here.